Trump as president. We do talk American politics. More of that in the show. I'm in Brussels today, where civil servants are locked behind doors trying to come up with a final Brexit deal. It's all down to people's interpretation of what the backstop means and what happens with the Irish border. The great sense here is that time is running out. My sense here is we're really very close to a deal. But something else that's happened today that I think is very significant indeed. French President Emmanuel Macron is on a week-long tour of the Western Front battlefields ahead of the big commemorations of the 100th anniversary of the armistice, which of course take place this Sunday on the 11th. And of course we will have our main national event at the Cenotaph with many thousands of other events taking place around the country. But the big international event will be at the Arc de Triomphe on Sunday. 80 world leaders are expected. It's a war, of course, in which all the participants suffered grievously, the French more than many. And today, Macron was at, I think, the single most significant place for France in that war, Verdun. The very name of that town had a huge psychological impact on France for many, many decades to come. It's a battle that begins in February 1916 with the German leader Falkenhayn saying, "We will bleed France white," an attritional battle. It got so bad and so serious that the British prematurely, they really weren't ready, launched the Battle of the Somme in July of that year to relieve the pressure. The battle went on until November. You can go and visit Verdun today, and you can see just square mile after square mile of shell-pot ground, 6 villages that were literally destroyed to nothing and never rebuilt, vast cemeteries, and at the centre of it all, a huge ossuary in which there are the bones of 120,000 dead soldiers organised in piles by body parts. And if you've got the stomach for it, you can look through the windows and see it. And it was at Verdun in 1984 where the President of France at the time, Mitterrand, and Chancellor Kohl of Germany stood and held hands in front of the ossuary, and they said, "From this, we move on to a united Europe." It was the first time I'd ever seen in public European leaders saying the European community, as it was then known, would move on to a full political union. The argument being the sheer horror of industrial warfare between France and Germany had to be replaced by something. Well, today, visiting Verdun, Emmanuel Macron has gone a whole lot further.
We have to protect ourselves with respect to China, Russia, and even the United States of America. When I see President Trump announcing that he's quitting a major disarmament treaty, which was formed after the 1980s Euro missile crisis that hit Europe, who is the main victim? Europe and its security. We will not protect the Europeans unless we decide to have a true European army. We need a Europe which defends itself better alone, without just depending on the United States, in a more sovereign manner.
A true European army, says Emmanuel Macron, backing up comments from Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker, who said not so long ago, deference to NATO can no longer be used as a convenient alibi to argue against greater European efforts. Folks, they're building a European army. They're not messing about. Isn't it funny? You know, people complain, the Ramonas complain that Boris put some numbers on the side of a bus and somehow that was a terrible lie. Do you know something? They've been lying to us for 50 years about the true intentions of the European Union. None more so, in my opinion, than back in 2014 when LBC hosted a debate with Nick Ferrari in the chair, and it was between me and the then Deputy Prime Minister, Nick Clegg, and we talked about the prospects of a European army.
40 years ago, it was a common market. Now it's a European Union that wants an air force, an army, a navy, and wants to militarily intervene.
This is a dangerous fantasy. The idea that there's going to be a European air force, a European army, it is simply not true.
Oh. Simply not true, says Cleggers. Simply not. All the way through, it's just a common market. Don't worry your silly little heads. Lies, lies, lies. Well, I don't know where you are, Sir Nick Clegg, tonight, but please, 0345 6060973 is the number. Maybe you've moved off to Facebook already. I don't know. I've warned about this for a very, very long time. But given that President Trump is going to be in France on Sunday. Isn't it extraordinary for Emmanuel Macron, the French president, to say we have to protect ourselves with respect to China, Russia, and even the United States of America? Is this not aggressive, outrageous language to use against a key ally? If you think, no, it's the right thing, he's protecting himself in Europe, call 0345 6060 973. If you think it's wholly unacceptable and damn rude and ungrateful, text to 84850 and tell me, is there anything wrong with the European army? And, interestingly, are we going to be involved? And we'll discuss that over the course of the next hour. Please tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and of course Facebookers, you can watch us live and comment there too. And I think it is outrageously offensive towards the Americans, but regular listeners to the show will know I crossed swords a couple of weeks ago with the President of the European Parliament, Mr. Tajani, who said the European Union had beaten Nazism and communism. They're trying to rewrite history. They're trying to use history to build a new superpower. And I think, actually, it's a dangerous development. Malcolm is calling from Baker Street. Good evening, Malcolm.
Good evening, Nigel. I've just been listening to your comments about this, what's his name, President Macaroni. He's an absolute imbecile, isn't he? This is the chap who wants to basically take umbrage with the leader of the free world and basically disrespect him at a time when we should all be coming together to remember the sacrifices people made over these 2 world wars. And he's got the audacity to stand there and basically say that we should protect ourselves against the USA. I'll tell you something for nothing, Nigel. We need to protect ourselves from this Mr. Macaroni because he's the one that's causing trouble. I've got umbrage with him, you know.
I tell you what, he is damned insulting towards the Americans who made massive sacrifices so that France could be free. He's also, Malcolm, he's also trying to hold NATO below the waterline. Malcolm, I've got the point. Oliver is calling from where? Good evening, Oliver.
Oh, good evening, Nigel. How are you?
I'm well, but I just cannot believe that. I mean, I get that Verdun's important to the French, but I just do not get this insult to America at this time.
Well, before I begin, I'll just admit that I am an open Europhile, but I have to concur with what you're saying, and especially at this time of year, as well as your previous caller said, you know, armistice coming up. I think Emmanuel Macron doesn't seem to be very well versed in the principle of realpolitik or indeed geopolitical studies, because the EU and EU leaders should really be leading, you know, by example. And his comments today, the connotations of isolationism and violence, it fosters rather negative thoughts. And whatever your opinion on Donald Trump, you need to remember, and Europe needs to remember, that it was the United States of America that really rebuilt Europe, and to now come out with this violent, violent rhetoric. Really, I think, you know, of course, you can have differences with various leaders, but to suggest that Europe now becomes some sort of insular nation state, supranational state, I think is disappointing, especially as we see that international diplomacy is collapsing in certain parts of the world. The European Union should be leading by example.
Oliver, he says we need a Europe which defends itself better alone without just depending on the USA in a more sovereign manner. So he's transferring sovereignty from a nation state to the EU level, but he's basically trying to get rid of NATO. It's a pretty stupid thing to do, Oliver, isn't it?
You know, obviously, if you look at, you know, America is the biggest contributor to the budget.
Big
and
time.
I think, you know, the whole idea, the whole ethos of the European Union was to foster a spirit of cooperation. And Emmanuel Macron's comments today kind of subvert that very principle.
You see, Oliver, I've been saying now, people haven't listened to me, obviously, but I've been saying for over a decade, there is a new nationalism. It's EU nationalism, and it's very worrying and very dangerous. Oliver, great call. Thank you. David in Romford is a new caller to the show. David, what do you make of Macron's comments?
I sound quite rational, if you ask me.
Right, so insulting the Americans just a few days ahead of President Trump going to the Arc de Triomphe is rational.
Nigel, why do you always overinflate everything? How has he insulted the Americans?
He said the United States of America could pose a threat to Europe.
Well, of course they could.
But they're our main ally in NATO.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. Trump himself has been trying to downplay NATO and wants Europe to look after themselves anyway.
Wrong. David, you're wrong. Trump has said he wants other members of NATO to pay the 2% membership fee, and then he'll be happy with it. The trouble is, of 28 members, only 6 are currently paying their way.
Yeah, but also, Nigel, you have to be able to read between the lines. Do we not have a massive aircraft carrier that we can't even put fighter planes on?
Well, that's because
it might help if the rest of Europe helped us to put planes on that aircraft carrier, wouldn't it?
Well, it might help us, David, if we had a British government that actually believed in defence. But David,
you about that.
David, do you believe? Let me ask you: do you believe that the development of a European army is the right way to go?
Of course it is. You want a war with Europe? We just want a little island on the side of the mainland.
David, I take a different view, but you've made the argument for a European army. Thank you. And Richard in Chelsea asks me, if there is a European military strike force, what's the chain of command and the rules of engagement? All I can say to that, Richard, I hope it's not Jean-Claude Juncker after a good lunch. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 6:15. I said it for years. They're going to build a European army. They all laughed at me. Clegg said it was a dangerous fantasy, but hey, it's out there. Juncker's been hinting, and today, President Macron has made it clear that they must build a true European army to counter threats that include the United States of America, and in so doing, willfully, in my view, trying to hold NATO below the waterline. But it's okay, Brexiteers, because our Prime Minister tells us that Brexit means Brexit. So presumably, we are not a part of this. We are in for a shock, because under permanent structured cooperation, known as PESCO, which legislation was put in place for back in 2009, and it was activated in 2017, that's after the Brexit referendum, we are a part of it. British forces are a part of it. In fact, 3rd Battalion, the Parachute Regiment, landed in Eastern Europe not so long ago, wearing European Union flags on their sleeves. There is so little debate about this, but there needs to be. Why? Because I see a European Union that is militarizing. I see a European Union without proper democratic control and scrutiny. I see a European Union that is expansionist and a European Union that is fanatical. Far from stopping wars, which was the thinking after Verdun and World War II and all of those things, these people really worry me. Stuart says, what a thing to say to the USA. No doubt all part of a plan to get some harsh words in response from the Donald. Then they will claim we've got to have an army. Well, Stuart, Donald's quite busy today with the midterms. I cannot imagine that Trump will go to France on Sunday and not comment in some way on Macron's comments. Gary says the US are our closest allies and Macron is a disgrace. Alison feels the same on Facebook. It's a disgrace. The USA should remind them of the sacrifices Americans made when it wasn't really their problem. And isn't that the point, Alison? I mean, World War I, those doughboys coming across the Atlantic to help Europe. They didn't need to. James is a new caller from Camden. Good evening, James.
Good evening, Nigel. I hear your sentiments, but I say a third way. We need a very strong Europe with a strong American ally. I think you look to history, but was it not for the arrival of the Americans in 1917 and that final offensive in the autumn of 18 with the Americans there wouldn't have been the armistice. And there are many arguments that we should have gone all the way and actually invaded Germany and actually put peace in there. But the point is, we need a very strong Europe, and we in Britain need to be part of that. And only by being part of Europe will we be able to have that voice and ensure that we have a strong Europe and strong NATO. And
James, there's one problem.
You have to blame at the moment two people. One, Brexit, which has caused this organisation, and Vladimir Putin is laughing all the way to our borders on Eastern Europe. We need to be part of this. You're right that we need everybody to share the bill and pay their 2%.
Absolutely.
So that includes us. But we also need less isolationist rhetoric from Donald Trump, which is allowing the forces of Russia to literally
what about Macron?
play with our very security.
What about Macron? Macron today was being isolationist. Macron was insulting our greatest military ally.
I think you have to move beyond. He's been pushed into a corner by being deserted by us, who are allowing chaos in Europe, and we will pay the price of it, and by a president who is turning in on himself, and you may or may not believe in Russian conspiracy theories, but ignoring their duties to be part
James,
of
I
the
want a
world
Europe.
order.
Look, I want a Europe that cooperates together, right? I want a Europe where nation states work together. I think the best way for joint defence is through nation states cooperating through NATO. I see a European army as potentially being a very dangerous thing with or without us. Do you see why? I mean, when I keep hearing here in Brussels, they want to expand to the east. It is an empire here. Barroso, the former Commission boss, called it that. What is wrong, James, with nation states cooperating under the NATO structure?
I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm just pointing out, Nigel, the reason we're here is because we have deserted Europe when
No, James. Look, come on. Come on. When I had that
round, an analogy of football. If you have 28 people playing football according to the rules, and suddenly the 29th pitch breaks off and says, "I'd like to change the rules," and by the way, I'm too broke to do it alone. Well, we are broke. We are not the nation we were in 1918, and certainly not in 1945.
We were broke then, weren't we? We were broke in 1918 in many ways.
Be involved in Europe and lead Macron in shouting like a little schoolboy with no money.
James, I think,
honestly,
I think you misunderstand Macron's motives. They loathe America. They loathe everything it stands for. Trump gives them a good reason to do so, and they want to destroy NATO. They believe that the European Union is going to become one of the world's great global military and economic superpowers. James, please, I think you are viewing these people too kindly.
But the French had the biggest number of casualties in World War I. They more than the Germans and more than us. They more than anyone else go to every village, know the perils of war. It cannot happen again, and we are edging there. And if we carry on arguing amongst ourselves whether in or out, we can be in both. In both.
James,
Britain's been strong.
James, we cannot have NATO in Europe and a European army. The two don't work together. That's my view. We agree to disagree. I thank you very much indeed for your call. Matthew says, when has Europe not been able to depend upon America? Matthew, you can still depend upon America. All Trump wants is people to pay their fair share. What on earth is wrong with that? This is another step towards a country called Europe. One country, one currency, one flag. Most of us have known it for years. I find Macron's statement utterly disgusting. He has dirtied the memory of 536,708 US military members that died in 2 wars, saving Europe from its own stupidity. Well, Chris, I agree with that. I'm going to Cobham to speak to Phil. Good evening, Phil.
Good evening, Nigel. Nigel, firstly, I mean, I don't know what you've read, or maybe I've read wrong. I'm just reading out The Independent. And I think you got it absolutely wrong what he said. I haven't heard the interview, I must admit, so I don't know what nuances were there. But the quote I'm seeing is, when I see President Trump announcing that he's quitting a major disarmament treaty, which was formed after the 1980s Euro missile crisis that hit Europe, who is the main victim, Europe and its security. All he's actually saying, he's not insulting, he's not saying that the United States of America have become the enemy. All he's saying is he's concerned about what American military policy will be. And I'm absolutely with him there. I mean,
well, let me repeat,
Phil. Never accept.
Phil, let me repeat. This is Macron. Today, we have to protect ourselves with respect to China, Russia, and even the United States of America. He couldn't have been clearer.
Exactly what I said. So he's not saying. He's saying. And even the United States of America, meaning, this is how I read it. But anyway, the bottom line is, whether you like it or not, Nigel, you always go on about the United States of America, saying what a great, example they are of freedom and democracy. Yes, they are United States. Take California out of the United States, and they're a fraction of what they are.
California,
you missed the point
but hang on.
Union should be.
But California is in the United States, and there's no prospect of it leaving.
But the point is, it is United States. And there is nothing wrong with believing. You know, I've travelled the world quite extensively, and there is no place in the world where I feel safer or more comfortable than in Europe. And I've lived and worked. I've spoken to you before. I can't get this point through. You totally, you know, in this modern world, when we have no idea what's going to happen in China, hopefully they will, eventually revert to a, very modern, liberal, democratic state. But who knows? We've got a rising empire in China and a declining empire in America. No person alive can remember America being any other than number one.
Well, I tell you what, Phil.
American
if we
psyche,
face,
Nigel, does not accept anything other than number one.
If we were to face a great military threat, I would ask you, Phil, who would you rather was on our side? Trump, NATO and the Americans, or Mr. Juncker and his European army?
Well, I've got to be honest, Nigel. You go on about Trump. I think he's the most dangerous thing that's ever happened to the Western world as leader of the Western world. So I've got no problem with that.
So the man that is...
what that guy believes in.
You know, we had the warmonger Obama, we had the warmonger Clinton, we had the warmonger Bush, we have President Trump, who gets the North Koreans to the table.
And I'm sorry. Oh, come on. You are... Nigel, I'm sorry. You jest when you go on like this.
He's not a warmonger like everybody else. He's not a warmonger like Blair, is he?
These issues are incredibly complicated, Nigel. I mean, for goodness sake...
Phil, let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a quick question. Time is running out. Quick question. Do you think a full European army and NATO can coexist?
I think that if you've got a full European army, of which Britain is truly a leading part of, there is actually no need for NATO. And
right,
America
Phil, there we are. We've got it. You and I disagree. I want us to maintain a close military relationship with America. You think Europe's the way forward. And that is what Democratic Debate here on LBC is all about. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show. It is now 6:30. French President Emmanuel Macron at Verdun today says we have to create a true European army to protect ourselves against countries like the United States of America. Isn't this aggressive language against a key ally just a few days before the armistice commemoration at the Arc de Triomphe? I think it is. I think a European army is very, very dangerous. Meanwhile, in America, millions of Americans are going to the polls today. In fact, the truth is, nearly 40 million have already gone to the polls and taken part in early voting, their form of postal voting, and that is a record. Many see this as a referendum on Donald Trump's presidency halfway through. You know, I can barely remember in years gone by, in the UK, us even talking about the midterm elections, and it's been a massive issue in the news. Everything to do with Trump, of course, is huge. If the Democrats take control of either parts of Congress, it could be very difficult for Trump to push laws through. They could even try and impeach him. So all 435 seats in the House of Representatives, the lower house, are up for grabs today, and a third of the Senate, 35 seats, are up today as well. Let's listen to the final plea from President Trump.
I've had a lot of people say, I don't know what midterm is, but now I'm watching every single minute, and I'm going out to vote. But the key is you have to go out to vote, because in a sense, I am on the ticket.
Well, in a sense, he is on the ticket, and he knows it. You know, people are going out there to vote for Trump or against Trump, and I suspect a little bit less about the individual candidates in their districts or in their states. And, of course, the Democrats, who don't have a leader, have had to drag out of retirement their former leader, Obama. Here was his advice today.
What kind of politics we expect is on the ballot. How we conduct ourselves in public life is on the ballot. How we treat other people is on the ballot.
Interesting. Love him or hate him, you got to say that Donald is in combative form and sounding pretty upbeat. And whatever you think of President Obama, I thought he sounded pretty down and depressed today. Maybe he's not well, I don't know. Listen, I can't predict what will happen. There are only two midterm elections since 1826 when the incumbent president actually won. One of them happened to George W. Bush in the wake of 9/11. So all the odds say that Trump will lose control, at least of the lower house today, probably keep control of the Senate. And that's what I guess the smart money is saying. But what we do know about Trump is all previous polling about this man has been completely and utterly wrong. And when you see a high turnout, well, it means there are people motivated to vote for him and against him. Look, this is impossible to call. All I can say is he does have a habit of surprising everybody. And at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, when Nick Ferrari comes on air on LBC, we will have a pretty good picture as to what the upshot of this is. Back to Monsieur Macron, and in my view, his insulting language. On Twitter, I get, seems like a good idea, given we cannot rely on NATO with Trump. A European army is a good idea to remove American far-right influence from Europe and the Atlanticists. Well, I tell you what, matey, I don't know who you are, but if you really, really, really think our security would be better by ditching America and going in with Juncker's army, I couldn't disagree more. On Twitter, NATO has passed its sell-by date. The EU has common land and economic assets to defend. Logical caveman to city-state to country and now regional. One world and one currency is way overdue. Oh, Lewis, I mean, it's lovely. Trotsky could have said that 100 years ago. I know there are people that believe that the EU is a model for one world government, but I promise you they are not ready to have an EU army, and I would not trust them with it. That's my view. And Martin on Twitter says, the army, one of the reasons why we voted to leave. If only Mrs. May understood that and we weren't part of PESCO. Let's go to David in Rochford, a new caller to the show. Good evening, David.
Hello, Nigel. Thank you for everything you've done over the years and changing politics as we know it today.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of people, David, trying to change it back, but hey, we are where we are. What do you make of these comments and their timing in particular?
I'm going to say cynically. Now, Belgium has ordered the F-35 over the Eurofighter.
Yep.
We're okay because we have a high percentage in the F-35, not so much in Europe or the Eurofighter. I think that Macron is doing this is because with the EU army, he can then justify spending and his country being the main development of military hardware. So I think he's saying Trump's really, really bad. We need the EU to have an own army. And if they have their own army, they can say, well, we can design and do everything else ourselves. So I think he's just saying this out because obviously France was quite annoyed that lots of other countries are getting the F-35 over the Eurofighter.
David, you may be right, but it's a very high-risk game to insult America, given firstly what it's done for France, and secondly, Trump is committed to NATO, provided people pay their way. Really rather foolish, isn't it, to do this?
Well, it's just like Argentina. When everything's going bad, you need a boogeyman. So if they drum up national support and, I dare say, EU nationalistic support against the enemy, it might bring everyone else together to say they're really bad, the UK's really bad, America's really bad, let's all work together. I think it's just a rouge so that people can have a bad man to rally against rather than them actually seeing that it's, like you say, the EU is trying to expand.
But it's a dangerous game, David. It's a dangerous game. Thank you for your call. Twitter is producing a lot of pro-EU army stuff. Given the fact we share lots of security concerns with our neighbours, plus we can barely afford to field our own military, well, we could, plus the US has demonstrated it's unreliable at leading NATO, it makes perfect sense. I do not believe America is unreliable at leading NATO. It wants people to do things properly. I thought the EU was about peace, not war. Well, my worry is the project founded on peace could well end up causing a war. And I mean that, folks. A militarized European Union without proper democratic control. They're working hard to abolish veto on foreign policy decisions like this, and they want to continue to expand to the east. Les says they always wanted to be a superpower, and that is true. Jan is calling from Houghton and Whiten and is a new caller to the show. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you? Thanks for taking my call.
Welcome. So, look, even if you did think a European army ultimately might be a good idea, isn't the timing of this completely crass?
So I'll give you my thoughts, Nigel. I'm not necessarily angry with his comments. I'm more disappointed with his comments. One, because of the timing, and two, because of my background. So I spent 23 and a half years with the Royal Air Force. I've served with NATO. I've been across Europe. I've been in America. I've been in Iraq. I've been across a number of operational fields with the coalition forces. I see the value and the benefits of having what may be regarded as a special relationship with America, but equally I see the benefits that it brings of having that coalition. What I find disappointing is that I seem to think that Macron has forgot the roots of how that coalition has managed to maintain Europe as the free sort of democratic state that it is. Forget about the actual European Union, but just the fact of how it now exists, given that coalition supporting an effort to take away what happened in the First World War and the Second World War. So the timing, I think, one, it's insulting, and two, it's extremely disappointing from a leader who is becoming more and more prominent as an EU voice.
Yes, I mean, he is trying to become the great, big, strong pro-EU voice, but the truth of it, Jan, is, of course, his own popularity is collapsing in France. And there's still, amongst the peoples of Europe, a lot of sympathy and support for America because of history and because of culture today. What do our kids watch? They watch American TV. I think he's done himself great harm with this. Jan, can I ask you, as somebody with nearly quarter of a century's service, what does this Sunday mean to you?
It's huge. It's enormous. It's about. For me, it's about reflection. It's about reflection on the sacrifices that were made by those, a century ago. It's reflection on the people in today's current operational fields who are making those sacrifices towards their family. It's enormous. Everybody is inextricably bound by essentially taking pain away, taking pain out the world. It's about a day of remembrance.
I suspect it means a bit. It must mean more to you, Jan, than it means to others that haven't served.
It does, but then again, I would start to, I don't want to impose my inner thoughts into that, Nigel. I guess when we look at what's happening coming up in the next 4 months, I guess the bit that perhaps disappoints me is we're talking about trying to maintain a relationship, about how we, after Brexit, how we maintain that cohesion between the United Kingdom and the EU, and yet comments like this, in my humble opinion, serves to be nothing more than divisive, and I don't see how that can be any benefit going forward.
Jan, great call. Thank you very much indeed. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 6:45, and when Nick Clegg was Deputy Prime Minister, he told us it was not going to happen. It was a dangerous fantasy. But hey, today, the French President, Emmanuel Macron, says we've got to build a true European army because we've got to protect ourselves against countries like the United States of America. What an insult, and what a worry this is for those that believe in cooperation with America and others in NATO. On Twitter, Matthew asks me, I wonder who Macron thinks should be in charge of this EU army. Don't know. Who do you think you were kidding, Monsieur Macron? Let's go to Maidenhead and speak to Mark, another new caller to the show. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm well. I just think these comments are very, very badly timed and deeply insulting to the USA, Mark.
Well, Macron's playing to his home audience in France. They want to see a strong France. They believe they still run Europe, so I'm not surprised by his comments.
Do they really still believe that, do you think?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I spend quite a bit of time in France, and yeah, definitely.
Interesting. But why do it? Mark, the Arc de Triomphe is going to be the global centre of remembrance of this remarkable event that took place 100 years ago on Sunday, with 80 global leaders coming. Why do it now?
I think he's just trying to show that strong France, and he's a strong leader. He's very, as you pointed out earlier, he's very much down in the polls.
He is,
People don't believe him. They don't want him. Most French presidents have a disaster 2 years in, and he's just facing it, and so he thinks, I'm going to do this. We'll have a European army.
Okay, well, you may be right. Although, Mark, I sense that, French people are just about as Eurosceptic as many British people, but so it may work and it may not work. Mark, how do you think strategically, does a European army make sense to you?
Well, my thought was that, what happens if, think about the US, what happens if there's a dispute within Europe? Is it possible for the EU army to march into a European country because they have a dispute with the EU? Could they declare martial law in Hungary or Poland?
Well, they've already taken away voting rights from Poland and from Hungary. And who's to say what they may do in the future, Mark?
Yeah, especially when you look at the history of the US. I mean, the commander-in-chief and in the USA, he was always sending in the army in the race riots during the 60s. So there was always sending in the National Guard and all of that. Which we could see that happen in Europe.
Well, I think generally it's a rule, isn't it? If you give government power, they tend to use it. So it's a further reason I agree with you for not building a European army. And do you think NATO works still, Mark, or not?
Of course it works. It's been working ever since the end of the war. There's nothing wrong. It's the classic, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's working fine.
Yeah. No, okay, Mark, thank you. And Mark making the point, if they get a European army, they are likely to use it. I get by text, would they be saying this if Trump wasn't in power? He isn't going to be there forever. Mary, they really can't stand Trump, but believe you me, from my first week in this building, 20 years ago nearly, I know the EU loathes America, and they want to build, Giscard and others have told me this, they want the EU to become a global superpower that is bigger and stronger than the USA. And again, I think history gives some really strong lessons here, that when you get emerging states that want to be big and powerful, they tend in the end to become very, very dangerous. Lulu on Twitter says, NATO is a peacekeeping force, a European army would be the opposite, an aggressive force. We don't know that for certain, Lulu, but it certainly could be. Claire is calling from Ashford and is a new caller to the show. Good evening, Claire.
Hi, Nigel. Thanks for taking my call.
Welcome. So wasn't he being rather rude today?
Sorry. Yes, well, I'm just really concerned about having this conversation, before Remembrance Sunday, because it's a real time to feel sort of patriotic about Britain and our laws and our sovereignty, isn't it?
Well, I would have thought so, Claire. And I think also it's a time to reflect on huge sacrifices that our forebears made so that not just us, but the rest of Europe could live in freedom.
Exactly. And so that's exactly what I've been thinking about, because it's so important, British laws, British sovereignty. And that's why I've been so disturbed by these news reports about the money which was spent in the campaign, and they're not knowing with Aaron Banks where it's come from. And I wondered what you thought about.
Well, I'm not discussing the referendum right here and now, Claire, but I'm very worried. I'm very worried about massive overspending by the government and many others in the campaign. Didier is calling from Wokingham. Hi, Didier.
Very good evening to you, Nigel. Thanks for having me online.
Now, I'm guessing from the accent, Didier, that you may come from France.
I am French. I've been living in the UK for 15 years. Yep. I came here for 1 month and never went back. And I still haven't gone back to France in more than 10 years. And I will not, even then I will not go back in case they tax me.
Is that so? You were a tax refugee, Didier, were you?
Yeah, well, not even. I came here with £2,000. So after divorce. So, but right. I was more. I am an EU refugee. Let's put it this way.
Okay. Right.
I may be the biggest French Brexiteer in the UK. I'm the only one.
No, Didier. I've met lots of French people living in the UK who think we're doing the right thing. But so come on, you're president of your erstwhile.
Not only is not my president, because I do not vote for crooks any longer. Right. I only vote in UK elections and not in French ones. Number one.
Okay.
Macron is a president in name only. Okay, basically. Both the EU and France import the world's misery. They export their talents. I am one of them, like many of the French people here in the UK. Okay, I did listen to what Macron said today in French, in my mother tongue, and it's more outrageous that you even mentioned,
really?
Nigel. I think you should get a proper translator. Macron is, I don't want to be vulgar on air, is a disgrace, okay, to the USA, to the UK, to Canada, and all the nations that saved France. Personally speaking, my dad is French. I lost and my mom is American. I lost my American granddad during the First World War, and I lost my mother's granddad. So I never got my granddad. Yeah. I never met them, and I found this utterly disgusting. Believe you me, he should be taken to court for what he said in French. Because the way you put
Didier, that's really, really interesting that if you think our translation was being too polite in terms of what he said. And Didier, just very quickly, there seems to be a certain type of French person who almost resents America from saving them. Is that fair?
It is fair.
It is fair. Yeah, I've sensed that. I've sensed that. Didier, we are out of time. I could talk to you for hours. Great call. Huge amounts of passion. European Army, Nick Clegg. It's happening. Do come on the show with me and talk about it at some point in the future. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'm back tomorrow night in London at 6. At 10 tonight, it's Tom Swarbrick. But up next, it's Ian Dale.
And what a great caller Didier was.